I want to ask you a question. When you hear the word depression, what comes to mind for you? I asked this question on Facebook a couple of weeks ago, and the expected words like anger, fear, sadness, guilt, and hopelessness were all posted. Some labeled depression as deeply negative or misguided thoughts. Another one posted that depression was a dark place, a canyon of emptiness, and when you're there, you feel like you can't get out, like you're trapped in a life of guilt, shame, and sadness. Until about a year ago, I would have used the same words to describe my own depression or my experience of depression. A dark canyon of emptiness that sometimes it took all of my energy just to pretend I was okay. And now, it's been more than 20 years since I was first diagnosed with clinical depression and I started taking medication. And at the time, I thought I was broken and I desperately wanted to fix myself. Based on everything I heard, I was sure that the secret to curing, coping, and managing depression was an unwavering positive attitude and to dive into personal development to get a better understanding of self. So I read the self-help books, I said the affirmations, I walked, I wrote, I meditated, I adjusted my diet, I even listened to motivational tapes, which later became motivational CDs, and then they became downloads. I mean, in all seriousness, I really thought I was doing everything the experts said I was supposed to do. I mean, I knew a few people who had used some of those techniques and had dramatic shifts. However, while sometimes doing those things lightened the load, in general, it wasn't moving the needle much for me. Any time I thought I would have depression beat at its own game, another episode or stretch of depression would hit. And the overwhelming feeling that I was failing, and failing everyone, and failing at everything, because I couldn't manage this one thing or get a grip on this one thing, depression. And what's worse, at this stage in my life, I don't even really have a good excuse to be depressed. I mean, I married my soulmate about 5 years ago. My family is close. We have a great social life. My business is growing and solid. But I still struggle to feel okay or even feel happy. With all the personal work I had done and invested in, I was baffled as to why I couldn't create stretches of contentment and joy the same way I had stretches of depression. I would get so angry with myself. All this effort, all the mental and emotional gymnastics I felt like I had to go through just to act like I was okay. It was exhausting. And yes, I had times where I contemplated if the effort was even worth it. But I carried on, as most of us do, and I really started researching this condition called clinical chronic depression. Quite unexpectedly, this self-education became a large part of how I shifted my feeling of being broken and empty. I read the many theories of how and why depression occurs. I read articles about how the brain functions and how we have neurotransmitters and the serotonin and dopamine levels and how they impact mood. The more I researched, the more I noticed that my own perception of depression was beginning to change. The more knowledge I gained, the less anger and upset I had over my depression. So one thing I did learn for me clearly, knowledge is very empowering for me. Then I made a huge discovery digging around in page 5 and 6 of Google. I found that there's pockets of people around the world who have a completely different view of depression. They don't view it as profound hopelessness. In fact, depression is simply accepted as the brain's way of recalibrating itself. And not only that, in some of these cultures, depression and anxiety are signs that someone is on a journey to achieving a higher level of consciousness or even having a spiritual breakthrough in life. Not only did this connect with me, it blew my mind. For the first time, I had to consider that my own view of depression was simply what my culture had told me it needed to be. This shift in perspective gave me a surge of excitement, and I kept researching. I ran across studies about the links between depression and artistic expression. I read about depression and intelligence, depression and leadership. I found that revered minds like Abraham Lincoln and novelist Ernest Hemingway were all well known for long episodes of depression. They called it melancholy back then, but it was the same basic description. And Lincoln was even diagnosed with an anxiety disorder. And today I read, big names like Lady Gaga and Michael Phelps have all spoken out about their very real struggles with depression. I really was beginning to see things from a different perspective, an empowering perspective. No wonder all the activities I took on to combat my depression didn't fix me. I was realizing there was a lot more to it. It was then that I really began to look at the role of depression in my life, not from what I had lost or the struggles I had, but I was looking from a place of success, the things that were working in my life. And I started to ask the question, does depression open up an opportunity to enhance some of the other skills, gifts, or talents that I possess that are a little above average, like Michelangelo or Michael Phelps? Think of it this way. We've all heard instances of how a blind person can develop a super enhanced sense of hearing or a super enhanced sense of smell to compensate for the lack of sight. What if depression is the same way? What if depression is kind of like a loss of sight? What if depression was compensating for some of the areas in life where I was above average? I was finally realizing that coping with depression was not at all about fixing myself. Coping, managing depression was about embracing myself. I really felt like this realization was a total victory. It changed my experience of depression. There's times when a depressive episode ends and I'll wake up the next morning and I will have a genuine excitement for life. I have an unstoppable drive. I'll have breakthroughs in my thinking and in my creativity. My brain is clear. And it's on these days where I am at my very best. These are the days where I'm outperforming, outthinking, and I'm outliving life. I'm in the zone, so to speak. So the question is, would I achieve that level of performance if it wasn't for depression? I think about that. What a thought. What if living a life I love and the success of as a business owner isn't despite my depression? What if it's because of my depression? My hope is the next time that you hear the word depression, that this talk comes to mind. I want the world to know depression is not a sentence to live a life of fear, anger, and hopelessness. But perhaps depression is just a required darkness to let in the light of everything that is extraordinary in those of us who have it. Thank you.